Hi, this is Tom Scioli. You're listening to the Nerd by Word podcast.
Welcome to a brand new episode of the Nerd by Word podcast, truly a wretched hive of scum and villainy. I'm Dave, I'm here with my co-host Kris, and we're ready to talk nerdy to you. Today's episode features an in-depth interview with jack-of-all-trades comic book creator Tom Scioli. But first, it's time for some nerd news. Kris, what do you have for us this week?
Well, I've got some new Star Wars news. I had a lead story, and then about an hour ago, I saw another Star Wars story. So I'm going to kind of give you a Marvel 2-in-1, if you will, of nerd news. First part of that is Donald Glover is going to return as Lando Calrissian, and that is music to my ears. In a much maligned film like Solo was, he was probably the strongest part of that film. Now, the more I revisit that film, the more I enjoy it. I will fully admit, I was much like the majority as a huge fan of Harrison Ford. I was skeptical going in. No one can do this but Harrison Ford. But I really thoroughly enjoyed it. And the more times that I watch this film, I've seen it 3 or 4 times now. I really, really love it. And Donald Glover is one of those creators, one of those personalities in Hollywood and in music that every time he's like King Midas. Everything that he touches seems to turn to gold. Community is a fantastic show, and he's one of the reasons behind that. He was fantastic here as Lando. His music as Childish Gambino is great. He's winning awards for his creator-owned show on Atlanta on FX. So yeah, the rumors here are that he's going to have his own Lando show on Disney+. Sign me up. I love Lando Calrissian as a character. And I feel like, similar to Harrison Ford, there are precious few people who can follow Billy D. Williams as like this sex symbol and like roguishly handsome, debonair swashbuckler in the sky. In a galaxy far, far away. And if anybody can do it, it's Donald Glover. So I'm super stoked about this. The second part of my 2-in-1 Star Wars story is one of my favorite people in Hollywood, Taika Waititi. You know him from Thor Ragnarok. You know him from What We Do in the Shadows. He's officially writing a Star Wars film. He is going to be at the helm. He previously had been confirmed to tap the director of a new Star Wars film. He's going to be writing that with Christy Wilson Cairns. And he confirmed today in an interview that he's writing the film. So, I mean, as a Star Wars fan, I know the Skywalker saga ended on kind of a sour note for a lot of us Star Wars fans, but you have to be happy with the direction that Lucasfilm is going forward with individuals like Donald Glover, Taika Waititi, people like this that are so creative and so entertaining, being at the center of this. Dave, what do you think about this?
Yeah, so Donald Glover as Lando Calrissian was genius casting, and is one of my favorite parts of Solo, a Star Wars story as well. Look, I'm with you. I liked Solo. I know that it's not necessarily a popular opinion among Star Wars fans, but I enjoyed it a lot. I feel like the movie got caught up a little bit in the backlash against The Last Jedi. Sure, it got bogged down in trying to over-explain everything about Han Solo, but the movie overall was a lot of fun. And I even would say that I wouldn't mind seeing Alden Ehrenreich again as a young Han Solo, maybe even in this Lando Calrissian show. Nobody can replace Harrison Ford, but Ehrenreich was enjoyable enough in the role. Anyway, I'm hyped for more Donald Glover in Star Wars. Lando is a great character to begin with. Glover does a great Lando on top of that. And as far as the direction that Star Wars is taking right now, most announcements that have been coming out have me extremely optimistic about the future of the franchise. It seems like Lucasfilm and Disney are putting their faith in some creative individuals that have a really good sense of what it takes to tell a good story. And so I'm hoping this is going to be significantly better in the future than the sequel trilogy was.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those of you who may not know, Taika Waititi actually did direct one of the latter episodes of Mandalorian Season 1. I believe it was Episode 9. So, I mean, you've already seen, his creative juices at work here in the Star Wars universe. So I'm right there with you. I'm super excited to see what goes here. Dave, you got some Xbox news for us. What's happening?
Chris, Fable is back. Fable is back. This is not a drill. Fable is back. So on Thursday, July 23rd, Microsoft gave the world a sneak peek at some of its games coming to Xbox Series X, the new console set to launch later this year. The show featured a lot of interesting games, including a closer look at Halo Infinite's gameplay, the first Dragon Quest game to ever come to a Microsoft console, a new game from Rare called Everwild, and a new RPG from developer Obsidian called Avowed. The highlight of the presentation for me, though, was a 60-second teaser for the return of the Fable franchise. The original Fable, for those of you that don't remember, launched on Xbox One and PC, with Fable 2 and 3 released for Xbox 360. The games could best be described as sort of an action-adventure type of game in the vein of a Legend of Zelda, but with a heavier emphasis on magic, RPG elements, and a system that tried to incorporate good and evil choices affecting gameplay and story. And I love the first Fable game. I found its sequel to be enjoyable too, although Fable 3 was not quite as much fun. Still, I'm a big fan of this franchise. Developer Playground Games is branching out to create this new entry in the series. They usually work on the Forza Horizon games, which, despite the fact that I usually don't enjoy racing video games that much, I really like these Forza Horizon games. It has really interesting gameplay, it's sort of a little more arcadey, and the environments in those games are absolutely breathtaking. So in short, I'm psyched. Obviously, I'm waiting to see more right now about what this game will actually look like, but I'm optimistic for a new Fable. Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, okay, so I'm gonna have to duck under my desk here after I say this. I haven't played any of the Fable games as of yet. But now that I see this announcement and I watch the trailer, I wonder how I have wasted away the past 16 years of my life and not playing this game, because it's everything that I love. So, I mean, I'm definitely headed to my Xbox as soon as we hit the stop button here, and I'm going to go remote download as many as I can if they're included in Game Pass or whatever. If I have to crunch some budgetary numbers and purchase anything that's available on my Xbox One right now, and I'm going to binge all of this, because I've had it recommended to me by friends through the years and stuff, but never really told me the full story. And if they would have told me the full story, I would have totally been in on this fandom, from the jump. So I'm totally excited for this. The teaser itself, nerds, if you haven't seen this teaser, go look it up. The new Fable teaser, it's fantastic. Like, it's great. You follow this pixie fairy, and then all of a sudden, this is not a happy ending, and it's completely jarring, and it takes you by surprise. It's a real nice bait and switch, so go check this out, and I'm totally excited for this story to continue.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. This is boding well for the future of the Xbox brand. And I have seen a lot of negativity already online saying that, Microsoft didn't show enough gameplay, didn't announce enough new games. But in the end, it's the little things like bringing Fable back that'll ultimately keep me happy as an Xbox owner. So I'm very excited about this. So, after this short break featuring some rocking music, we'll be back with comic book creator Tom Scioli. You don't want to miss this. Stick around. Welcome back to the Nerd Byword. This week we have a special guest, writer, artist, colorist, jack of all trades, Tom Scioli. You know him from his series The Myth of Eight Opus, Godlands with writer Joe Casey, Transformers vs. G.I. Joe, GoBots, and Fantastic Four Grand Design. Most recently, he wrote, penciled, and colored a graphic novel biography of Jack Kirby titled Jack Kirby, The Epic Life of the King of Comics. Tom, welcome to the Nerd Byword. We're thrilled you could join us today.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
So, obviously, the natural place to start with an interview like this is with the beginning of your comics career. What ignited that first passion for art in you? Was it comics or something else?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, it was just like art is just something I've always been involved in, just ever since I was a little kid. Yeah, I don't think it was comics in particular. It was just drawing for drawing's sake. I mean, if anything was the influence, it might have been like TV, and particularly TV animation. But yeah, I mean, it started so early. I barely recall it. But comics, they were in the mix, but it was something I did. It was sort of like a pre-literate activity, something I was involved in before I learned how to read. So I wasn't reading comics at that point.
Is there a particular comic or run of comics that you remember being the first things that really kind of set you on the path of enjoying that type of medium?
Yeah, I mean, I remember like Star Wars comics. And I remember like the comics that came with He-Man action figures. Those were probably the first ones I encountered. I think superhero stuff came like a little bit later, but I think it was just like as a little kid I loved Star Wars, and then seeing like Star Wars comics on the shelf at B. Dalton Books or one of those kind of places.
Yeah, I remember those He-Man comics very well. They were incredibly memorable, very visually arresting stuff.
Yeah, those like very first ones, they had like Alfredo Alcala artwork, and it was like very, like you said, very arresting. It was like really dark, lots of like deep shadows, and just like really perfect, perfect for what they were depicting, like perfect like barbarian artwork, and Alfredo Alcala worked on like a ton of Conan comics, so it was a natural he was a natural choice to illustrate those.
Now, Tom, probably your most popular and famous work to date was Godland with writer Joe Casey. Can you tell us a little bit about your time working on that title and what made that book so special to you?
Yeah, I mean, I put a lot of years into it. Like it's the, I think the longest, stretch of like, working on a comic for me was that one. Yeah, I mean, it came along at, like just like a good point in my life. Like it was, I was, kind of young and just starting out, and, had like a lot of like optimism and sort of, wide-eyed going into it. And like I learned a lot working on it, and and I put in a lot of time, and I think we ended up making like 37 issues of it, which is like the longest run I've had with a comic. It was it was just like a really good time, and Joe Casey was fun to work with, and it was exciting doing a comic like at Image, and creator owned, and it was my first like color comic, like the first, that was really important to me. I always wanted like my work to be in color, and back when I started, it was like I was doing black and white comics. It was like a budgetary thing, like color is just so much more expensive, and it's a different world now. Like if I want to do color, I can do a color comic and put it online, but back then that was not as easy as it is now.
One of the things that we like to revisit in each episode of our podcast, particularly when we have a professional from the comics industry, is the writer and artist relationship. How did that work with Mr. Casey? Like the back and forth, the scripting, and the plotting, and all of that. What was that working relationship like? Did he kind of lead the charge with that, or was it more of a collaborative thing?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty loose. Like we wanted to do like what we understood to be like the Marvel method, where it's like more collaborative. It's not as like strictly broken down. Like, okay, here's the script, here's what you do. Like it was a little more loose, and even like just going back to the very beginning of it, it was a lot of just like me like emptying my sketchbooks and just like throwing a bunch of characters in and us kind of kicking ideas and storylines back and forth and stuff and like very collaborative, not not what you would envision for like the pre-Marvel sort of, I guess, like the DC method or whatever you'd call it, where there'd be like a strict script with like, okay, here's what happens in panel 1, here's what happens in panel 2, here's what everybody's saying. It was way more loose than that. And, and then there were like, 1 or 2 issues where like I just sort of like, solo, plotted it. And then, Joe did the words, but most of them were like, this really, really like collaborative things, pretty close to, like, having learned more about the Marvel method and about like Stan Lee and Jack Kirby's working conditions, like this thing that we call the Marvel method doesn't quite fit the way Jack and Stan work. But that aside, like we worked like the way the Marvel method would be described in sort of like a textbook, the way it would be described in a, like, how to make comics the Marvel way, or I think there's also been some like Marvel, like how to write comics specific books that have come along, and it was pretty much what's described there.
Now, Godland and several of the other works show a strong Jack Kirby influence. How would you describe Kirby's impact on you as an artist?
Yeah, I mean, it was just like a thorough, his work just consumed me and just kind of like took over, and I just I just wanted to do things the Jack Kirby way. Like I really, it was like like kneeling before your the king or whatever. Like I was like fully enthralled by how the way he put things together, the way he took things apart. Just like his whole universe, it just like blew me away. And so I wanted to reverse engineer it. I wanted to, like, how does he do that? How does he think like that? So it was kind of like I, when I started studying his work, I sort of came out the other side, just, like a full on like student of Jack Kirby. Like I, was really like trying to emulate him as much as I could. So, I mean, I can't, say enough about his influence. And I mean, as the years have gone by, I've sort of found like my own, place in things and taken that influence and kind of like made it my own and incorporated it into other things. But I mean, it was, for a really long time, it was just, Jack Kirby was just everything.
And that brings us to the graphic novel biography of Jack Kirby that you've recently released. Why did you decide to go like a graphic novel style biography here, and how did this whole project come about? Like, take us back to the origins of this whole thing?
Yeah, I mean, like it was like around his 100th birthday, and it's something I'd always wanted to do. I'd always wanted to, either see Jack Kirby's story told in comic book form, initially, when I first learned about Jack Kirby, I was like, oh, I wonder if he ever did, like write his life story or do his life story comic, and he didn't. He did one story called Street Code, which is like a short, 12 or 15 page story about like some of the gang fights that he got in when he was a kid. But then that's it, and there was nothing else. So it was like at first it was like, oh, I'd really like to read this, and then finding out it doesn't exist, it's like, oh well, maybe I could make a comic like that. That would be pretty cool, and just kind of filed that away, as like a potential thing. But then as his, I think it was like it's Jack Kirby's 100th birthday. It's kind of like, you know what, like this would have been the time to have it for his 100th birthday, and it's like, it's now or never. Like I got to get this thing rolling. So I started posting, like a panel at a time or a couple panels at a time, putting it up on Instagram, like and working on it, little by little, in chronological order, and it just kind of grew from there.
Now, how did the book land at 10 Speed Press? They don't seem to be exactly a traditional comic book publisher. I mean, they publish some graphic novels, but they publish a lot of other stuff too. How did that connection come about?
Yeah, I mean, I just I had my agent was kind of shopping it around to different places, and they were they were the right fit. But it was like you said, it's not like it wasn't. I mean, the companies I'd worked with before were sort of like comic book companies, like Image, Marvel, IDW. Like these are like comic book companies, and so yeah, this was different. Like this was, and I was kind of creating it with a mind towards that sort of like other market, the sort of like book, like the book world, the like those kind of publishers, and for those kind of things, you need an agent, as opposed to the regular comic stuff, which I could sort of like negotiate myself and like set those things up myself. This was like, okay, in this sort of like publishing world, like I need an agent to kind of like guide me through this.
Now, in reading Jack Kirby, The Epic Life of the King of Comics, one of the most striking features of your art are Jack Kirby's eyes. They're much larger and more expressive than those of other characters. I remember when Captain America Civil War came out, and Spider-Man was introduced into the MCU, one of the first conversations Dave and I had was, look at those Ditko eyes. Look how expressive Spider-Man's eyes are on screen. And that's, very similar here. You can see the emotions on each panel. Can you tell us a little bit about that artistic choice and why you decided to go in that direction?
Yeah, I mean, Jack Kirby, he's the focal point of this book. Like he's the person you're you're going on this ride with him, and it just like it kind of makes him into like a visual focal point. I think there's just like this like psychological thing that happens where when someone's drawn in a like sort of simplified cartoony manner, it invites reader participation. Like you're just like ready to go on this ride with this character. So I mean that was kind of like first and foremost in my sort of conscious decision making for it. I mean, one thing when you're making a comic, you have to make like thousands of decisions, and so you sort of have like your conscious like rationale for doing it, but then sometimes you're just kind of like going from the gut. Like it's just kind of like a decision just kind of makes sense to you, and like in this case, I think there was some of that too. It was just like it just felt like the right thing to do. Like I had different like rationales of why it made sense, but it was just it just like it just felt right. It felt like the right way to tell this story.
So in going through the actual book, I found it all very interesting. But then when you hit the point where he goes to war, there's a completely different emotional resonance to that. It's like the book just goes from really visually interesting and a great story to just like emotionally affecting. What was it like to actually draw those pages of Jack Kirby at war?
Yeah, I mean that was that was really difficult and and like you said, emotional. It's just like there's just like a lot of things you have to do like in those, like, first of all, like, I've never been to war, I've never been involved in a war, I've never so it's pretty far beyond my personal experience. So there's that, like, I need to reckon with that and understand it like that way. But then just like the things that he was involved in and just like just like the brutality and that, like, sort of hair raising near, it was like constant near death experiences, like it was a lot to sort of wrap my head around, and he tells these stories, like, these are like his personal experiences, and there's like YouTube videos you can watch where he's telling these stories, and it's just like amazing, like the view that he had of war. Like, he was really he was like a scout, so he would be the first, among the first in these hostile, enemy occupied territories, and he'd have to sort of mark out troop formations and gun placements on a map, and then come back and report back what he found. So he'd get into some really bad situations. And it is, like, narratively, it is kind of it's a really interesting left turn for the story to take. Like, if you're not familiar with the story of Jack Kirby, because it is like, oh, okay, I get what this is. It's the story about a guy who created comics, and here he is. He's drawing this, he's drawing that, and then it's like, okay, now he's on a boat. Okay, now he's landing in Normandy. It's like I didn't know the story was going here. Like, it's a really interesting left turn. And then the war's over. Like his he goes home, and then the war ends, and it's like, okay, back to making comics. Like, it's pretty wild.
Now this is like I kind of compare this to like a dissertation, if you will. This project is like a culmination of your life's work, so to speak, like telling the story of Jack Kirby, someone who's been so influential. So how do you go about tackling all of the research necessary to tell the story of Jack Kirby and his life?
Well, I mean, I had, like, an asset that I had going into this was just my sort of like years and years of studying Kirby to just like, sort of crack the Kirby code, like of trying to like learn to think and create and draw like Kirby. I studied his work very closely and studied his life, and so I sort of went into this project already having like a pretty strong grasp of his life story. So that's like an excellent starting point if you're gonna do a project like this. And so from that point, it was kind of like, okay, now I'm sitting down and telling this story, telling it in roughly chronological order. Then it's like you go in with like the macro lens. Then it's like, okay, okay, I know this happens. Let me go read as much as I can about this particular part of his life that I'm trying to depict now. Let me go read about like what was happening in the world at that time. Like just like taking it slowly, like one bit at a time, and then continually revising and adapting the sort of like larger roadmap that I had for the entire thing. So it's just kind of the stages, or it's like you have like the big view, and then you go in close, and then you pull back out, and then you go in close, and you pull out. So it's it was just this like ongoing process of like reassessment.
So the book is mostly told from Jack Kirby's perspective. But when the situation comes to Kirby and Stan Lee, you give a few pages to Stan Lee's perspective once Kirby comes back to Marvel. And it's very interesting to read through those pages. Because, there's this infamous working relationship between Kirby and Lee and kind of a debate of how much Stan Lee and how much Jack Kirby is in some of the characters that are now so famous at Marvel. Where do you come down on that debate? Who do you believe was the driving creative force in that relationship?
Yeah, I mean, it's very complicated. I mean, I come down on the, okay, Jack Kirby is the driving creative force behind the relationship. From what I see, he was, bringing, more to the table than Stan. But again, it's like, I'm an outsider, there's only two people who, knew the answer to like who did what. And that's, Jack Kirby and Stan Lee. And so, like, you don't know for sure, but just, everything I could tell, like, just looking at the work each of them did before, during, and after, you get kind of a sense from there. And then looking at the work that like Stan did with other creators, versus the work he did with Kirby, it's like you kind of get a sense of like who brought what. And, I think Kirby was the driving force. I don't think that Stan like didn't do anything, and I don't think Stan was just a hype man or whatever. Like I think the hype man part, was that was sort of Stan's job. But I think he did bring creative stuff to the table. But I think Jack Kirby is just this like elemental force, and was like throughout his career. So it would be hard for me to believe the sort of story that I'd been told when I was a child, that Stan Lee sort of created everything, and then he had some artist friends who drew his these like brilliant ideas that he had to his specifications. Like I don't see that.
Now, you did some work yourself at Marvel, working on the Fantastic Four Grand Design. What was that experience like for you?
Oh, it was great. I mean, it was a lot of fun, and it was like a dream project, and and it was like it fell in my lap, right as I was working on this Jack Kirby book. So it was like sort of the perfect thing to work on. That like the two works are almost like companion pieces. Like I couldn't have, it couldn't have like worked out better if I'd like engineered it. It was just really great, and I had like full like freedom to do it my own way, and just it was a great experience. I really enjoyed it, and really happy with it.
Now, you also did some fantastic work on both Transformers versus G.I. Joe and then GoBots at IDW. Both of those books have been described as having a retro feel. Was that your intention going into those projects?
I mean, like when I do stuff, it just kind of comes out. It comes out how it comes out, and I mean, I like the way old comics look, and particularly the color of old comics. And there's just like a richness to them, and I've tried sort of other ways of coloring comics, and gotten some interesting results and some good results. But yeah, there's just like a richness to like that sort of old kind of comic coloring. There's something about like the lines not being quite black lines, and the colors kind of being in sort of like this close range, and the sort of pulpy texture. Like it kind of, like it looks like it looks like classical painting. Like it looks like the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. But like I just love that aesthetic. So that was the aesthetic I brought to it. So I mean, retro is is one way to describe it. I mean, like something I was really thinking of, like when I was doing Transformers versus G.I. Joe, like I was giving so much thought to color. And like one thing that I was looking at was like, there's that famous issue that's like the silent issue of G.I. Joe. And it's a classic. Like it's just a great comic with like Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow. And I had like the original version, the old comics version, and it's beautiful. It's atmospheric and it's rich and dark. And then I had sort of the reprint version, which was printed on white glossy paper with it was like the same numerical color values, but when you do it on sort of like glossy paper, it looks like a totally different thing. And like I just like was like obsessing over looking at the two of them side by side, and it's like the reprint just loses everything. Like the original is a great comic and so beautiful, but then the reprint is not a great comic. The original takes place at night. The reprint takes place during the day. Like the colors are just too bright to be a night scene. Like it was just amazing to me how much a comic could lose if it's not if the color isn't handled like very delicately. So I kind of took that to heart, and that kind of is what made me color it the way I did.
Now, Tom, in a 2004 interview with comicsreporter.com, so that's a significant time ago, you mentioned that working in comics was still a hobby, but that you had to, quote, keep your day job. 16 years later, is that still the case, and why or why not?
Oh, no. Yeah, I mean, I quit my day job a long time ago. Yeah. I quit it, not too long before Transformers versus G.I. Joe. And it was just, it was just something I had to do. Like I sort of reached a point where it's like, I had to make that decision. And I wish I had done it sooner, because it did, like, my work just kind of took on a momentum after that. Like you just go into a totally different mindset, and just having like way more time to work on stuff. So yeah, it was the right way to go. I mean, it's, I did a lot of comics while working a day job, and it is possible. And, and a lot of people do it, like, but I'm glad that I don't have to.
Now, Tom, you're also a bit of a unicorn when it comes to the comic book industry, because you pencil, you color your own work, you write. I believe you did some lettering also, hand lettering. You kind of do it all yourself. Why do you think that is, and why is that so unusual in the industry today, you think?
Yeah, I mean, the reason it's unusual is because it's so much easier to not do everything yourself. It's so much easier to be part of a team. It's like, it's really hard for me to like relinquish control of any aspect of the production. Like I have very strong opinions about my work and how I want it to be presented, and every aspect of that. And so, the only way to ensure that is to just handle everything myself. And as of now, I've, been able to do that. I mean, if I get to the point where that, isn't the case, then I'll adapt. But yeah, if I can do it all myself, I want to do it myself. I want it to be exactly the way I want it to be.
So, Tom, what is up next for you? Are there any other upcoming projects that your fans can look forward to? Anything that you can reveal at this time?
No, I mean, I'm still figuring that out. Like I'm working on a bunch of different things, and just like playing. Like I haven't decided yet, like what's going to be like the big project that I'm going to do, for the next, year or 2 or 3 or 4. I'm really just playing right now. And I think you said something along these lines earlier in the interview of this being like a dissertation or something. Like this really is a hard thing to top. Like this is kind of this project, this like life of Jack Kirby. It is as if everything I've been doing prior to this has been leading up to this. So I'm really at a loss for exactly how to follow that up. I mean, I have a lot of different things I'm sort of playing with and tinkering with, but so far, like nothing has like sort of grabbed me by the lapels, like this project did. But I'm sure, any day now I'll sort of like figure out what that next thing is. But I'm still figuring that out.
Tom, it has been a huge pleasure to have you on the show today and have this conversation with you. If our listeners want to connect with you online and keep up with your upcoming projects as you announce them, where can they find you on social media or the internet in general?
I'm at Tom Scioli on Twitter and at Tom_Scioli on Instagram. And these sort of like experiments and things that I'm tinkering with, I've been posting those on my Twitter and Instagram, so you can kind of see like just the kind of ideas and comics and things that I'm playing with.
Fantastic. Well, there you have it. The book is Jack Kirby, The Epic Life of the King of Comics by Tom Scioli, available now wherever books are sold. When we come back from our final potty break, it's time for our weekly nerd commendations. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back. All right, and we're back. Kris, it is time for some nerd commendations. What do you have for us this week?
So my nerd commendation comes from the contents of the afternoon that I spent today. I read issues 1 through 5 of a limited series, a team up, if you will, of the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And it is everything that a 90s kid like myself could hope for it to be. It is written by Ryan Parrott, who is, as I understand, is still cranking out stuff at Mighty Morphin Power Rangers title. The art is done by Simone DeMeo with art assistance from Alessio Zono. And I cannot say enough about this. This is the most fun I've had reading a comic in a very long time. And I'm going 2 for 2 here in back-to-back Power Ranger nerd commendations. But everything that the story lacked in the video game Battle for the Grid that I recommended last week, it makes up for it in this comic. It is such a creative way of intertwining these two very different franchises, these two very different character sets. I think the strength of the series is the writing in particular, but that is in no way to poo-poo the art of Simone DeMeo and Alessio Zono. It's got some really cool, like, redesigns of the turtles in particular. At first, I didn't know how I felt about it, but as the series went along, I was like, okay, this is cool, I get this. It has kind of like an anime vibe to particularly the turtle scenes and like the Foot Clan. But the basic premise is, stop me if you've heard this before. Tommy the Green Ranger's in trouble. He's got a little bit of a questionable character. So if you're a Power Rangers fan, that's nothing new for you. So, and it starts off with a misunderstanding, as a lot of these hero versus hero books do in comics, with the Power Rangers and the Ninja Turtles facing off against one another. Then they understand it was, they come to find out that it was all a big misunderstanding, and then they team up. There's a lot of really cool mashup stuff that happens. They take the best elements of each franchise and mash it up into like some really cool stuff that I don't want to spoil. You can find all 5 of these issues digitally on Comixology for $2.99 a piece, which I was happy to find, as we talked about before in one of our previous episodes, are cheaper than the actual print copies. So if you want to just read it as a reader, you can find it digitally for pretty cheap, $2.99 an issue. There's only 5 issues, so $10-15 and you'll be able to read the whole thing. This is one of the few runs, however, that I wanted to buy physical copies for because it was such a special edition that they made all of these cool variant covers for. And I was able to find 3 at my local comic book shop, Dwayne's World, and I was able to find the two that I couldn't find there, I found on mycomicshop.com. And some of the variant covers were the Ninja Turtles holding the Power Rangers helmets. So I'll post those on all of our social media, but they're just like iconic to hold. So as I've previously stated on the show before, I'm primarily a reader first, and there are very select few comics that I want to collect, at this stage in my life with small children that I don't want them to mess them up or whatever. But this is one of the ones I splurged on because the covers are so cool. I can't say enough about this comic. It's just so much fun. The interpersonal relationships between some of the Rangers and the Ninja Turtles. You have my personal favorite, the Black Ranger, talking with Michelangelo, one of my favorite turtles, about pizza toppings. You have Leonardo and the Red Ranger being insufferable, ne'er-do-wrong, Dudley-do-right leaders. You have Donnie and Billy the Blue Ranger being absolute nerds. Oh man, nerds, just wait till you see Billy the Blue Ranger and Donnie geek out over tech stuff, and they build robots together. It's freaking beautiful, ladies and gents. So, the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers TMNT series, it's only 5 issues. You can find it on Comixology for $2.99 each issue, or you can find them probably about $4.99 physical copies in your LCS or online, but I highly recommend this. It's so much fun, and I had the best day today reading all 5 of those issues.
This is an absolute fanboy's dream. I didn't know about this book, but I will definitely be seeking it out. I remember when Power Rangers in Space met the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in live action, and those were the Next Mutation Turtles, and the less said about that show, the better. So this sounds like a much, much superior meeting between Power Rangers and Turtles. Now, Chris, I did have one question when I saw this recommendation. What version of the Turtles do you think these Turtles are based on? 80s cartoon, live action movies, Michael Bay?
These are, so this is kind of a 2-for-1. Again, I'm a bargain shopper. This is like a 2-for-1 nerd commendation here, ladies and gents. Dave, these are the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles that you recommended to me our first episode, the current IDW series. It's in the same voice and the same style. I was easily able to slide. I was kind of nervous. I put off reading these. I had them sitting on my shelf for a couple of weeks. I was like, I don't know. I haven't read any I haven't read any Power Ranger comics. I don't know if I'm going to be able to read this. Is this something that I need prior knowledge to or whatever? No, this is exactly the IDW current run Ninja Turtles that you're reading, and these are the 90s Power Rangers that you know and love. Kim is the Pink Ranger, Jason is the Red Ranger, Billy's the Blue Ranger, Zach is the Black Ranger, and Trini is the Yellow Ranger. It's just fantastic, and I cannot say enough about Ryan Parrott's writing. He understands each character. Like, even Splinter has some absolute beautiful, like, Splinter-isms, like those sage, like, nuggets of wisdom that he loves to drop on us. Shout out to the original nerd dad, Splinter. And then also his work with Shredder and Rita Repulsa, Goldar even. So the character work on this and the writing, I can't say enough about. Now, Dave, we go from a comic book to a television series with your nerd commendation. What do you have for us?
So this week I am gonna go ahead and stick my toe in some waters that can be rather dangerous, and that is the Trek fandom. My recommendation this week is the television series The Orville. The first 2 seasons are available on Hulu, and a 3rd season is apparently currently in development. The series was created by and stars Seth MacFarlane, probably most famous as the creator and voice actor on the animated series Family Guy. It is in essence a Star Trek tribute show. Now, when I first saw the trailers for this show, I feared that it would be primarily a comedy, basically like Family Guy in space or something. But it has turned into something much better than that. In many ways, it doesn't feel like a parody of Star Trek so much as it does feel like a love letter to Star Trek. There's a real effort in the show to create believable characters struggling with complex moral and ethical issues. And it does that and still is able to maintain a sense of humor, even when things get dark sometimes. And I won't deny that the humor can be a bit juvenile, but when the Orville works, it's just good science fiction, humor or no humor. Ultimately, I think fans of science fiction and Star Trek in particular should give this show a shot. Just be sure to stick around for several episodes while the show finds its legs. Once it really starts clicking, I would say that it tries to tell story in the vein of the original series and the Next Generation. Very much social commentary, dealing with complex issues, bringing things down to the character level and really digging in on who these characters are. It's really shocking, actually, in a lot of ways, when you compare what the show has become to the initial marketing campaign. It doesn't really feel like a comedy. It just feels like a really good science fiction show. And I was surprisingly pleased with it.
Now, we talked about this show specifically in a number of situations. I think we talked about this at work one day after we clocked out. We also talked about this off camera after our last episode recording. And my initial reservations about this show was being a huge fan of Star Trek Discovery and loving that show, and then the backlash that Discovery in particular has received from a lot of toxic fans online. Their calling card and their battle flag, if you will, was thank God for the Orville, and that's quote unquote real Trek. So like I saw this from a different perspective, and I had my reservations about even pressing play on this, but you went a long way in convincing me off camera with this, and that you can enjoy both, and that you if memory serves, you enjoy both shows. Is that correct?
Oh yes, I'm a big fan of Discovery as well. They're just two very different approaches to the same idea. I would say Discovery tonally reminds me much more of something like Star Trek Deep Space Nine, which is by far my favorite Trek show, whereas The Orville reminds me more of Star Trek the original series and to some extent Next Generation. So I don't think that there is necessarily a place where these two shows have to be in some kind of rivalry, or the fans of these two shows have to be in some kind of rivalry. I think they each reflect a different aspect of what Star Trek has been in the past. And they're both very well done. So the way I see it, the more the merrier.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And that's my hope. So I'm definitely going to give this a shot. And I appreciate your defense of it and bringing like a new lens to it.
All right, well, that's it for another episode of the Nerd Byword podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. Remember, we want to hear from you. Comments, suggestions, complaints, bring them on. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at Nerd Byword and on Facebook as The Nerd Byword. If you're on Apple Podcasts, please drop us a rating and a review. You can also go to ratethispodcast.com/nerdbyword. That's ratethispodcast.com/nerdbyword and drop a review there.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have breaking news. I talked Dave into Twitter a couple of weeks ago, but now I've finally peer pressured him into Instagram as well. So you can find myself at That Nerd Kris on Twitter and Instagram individually. But now you can also find Dave at That Nerd Dave on Twitter and Instagram. So go give him a follow and welcome him to Instagram as well, and show him what an awesome, welcoming fandom community that is. As always, we thank you for joining us for another episode. Be sure to subscribe wherever you find your podcasts, if that's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, TuneIn, or our fancy website, nerdbyword.com. Just hit that subscribe button, and every Monday morning you're going to be graced with yet another episode. We've had some fantastic interviews here in the past few weeks with Luciano Vecchio and Tom Scioli today. And we've got some more great ones lined up in the weeks to come. So stick around, and thank you for your support, and stay well and stay nerdy.
The Nerd Byword is produced by two nerds, Kris and Dave, to encompass all aspects of the nerd multiverse. The theme music was written by Al Jimenez. Our show art features original art by Ashby Design, as well as public domain comic panels. Find us online at nerdbyword.com, on Twitter at nerdbyword, and send questions and comments to nerdbyword@gmail.com.